Hello, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So, in the kind of the commencement of the trade war between India and America, one news that stood out as well related to military and defense technology is that India is said to have officially rejected the F-35 stealth fighter jet, which were proposed by President Donald Trump back in February. I remember that when President Trump and Prime Minister Modi had their joint presser at the White House, and President Trump dropped this bombshell that he's willing to sell these jets to India, there were a section of analysts and think tanks or influencers in India which went gaga over all of this. The reels were viral, the potential proposals and joint production and whatnot, like people were just building castles in thin air. But even back then, my position was firmly maintained that defense deals do not happen on the basis of how viral a reel is or what some influencers think. It's on the basis of how technically compatible is a system with us, how financially viable is it, how much strategic autonomy do we get. And in the midst of all this, the key factor is that system worthy of the price that we are going to pay for it. It's about $120 million per jet compared to just 40 million or 50 million at the most for the Su-57. So let us see what could have led to this rejection. Well, we've discussed the geopolitical factors in the previous video. The trade war is the most apparently visible issue, and even other things such as President Trump's behavior with us ever since we successfully concluded Operation Sindoor and his overtly pro-Pakistan policy in the couple of months has contributed to this particular rejection. But now let us discuss this platform itself, the technical aspect of it. One thing about the F-35 is that just a couple of days before I'm sitting to record this video, we've had a US Navy F-35C crash. This is the 15th crash since the jet became operational with the US in 2015. This is a abysmal crash rate of 1.5 per year. For context, let us look at our Air Force's mainstay, the Sukhoi Su-30 MKI, the Indo-Russian, the symbol of Indo-Russian brotherhood. This jet has crashed just 12 times in the past 21 years, since 2004 when it became operational in the Indian Air Force. And one thing to note is the trajectory of these two jets. The Su-30 was conceptualized during the end of the Soviet era. It was funded during the time of the newly born Russian Federation, when the Russians themselves were grappling with a economy and nation on the verge of collapse, essentially. Even India was not even 1/3 of what we are right now. So it's with such scarce resources and in such an uncertain and turbulent financial climate that the two countries managed to develop an Indian version of the Sukhoi 30. Compare that with the F-35. It was conceptualized in the late 90s and it was developed throughout the first decade of the 2000s, which means that it was done when the American economy was a huge force to be reckoned with. It was done in a period where America enjoyed its unipolar moment. And in fact, multipolarity only became a thing after the rise of China following the 2008 global financial crisis. But by then, the F-35 was almost developed. In 2015, it became operational. So, despite of receiving much greater funds and despite of having much bigger political capital backing it, the F-35 does not seem to justify the price tag. It does not seem to be as technically efficient as the Su-30 MKI, which was discussed a few minutes ago, the circumstances of which have been already highlighted in the video. Let us look at the combat records of both these jets, right? Because that's something that is the most important one. Well, the F-35 has no real combat record against a comparable jet. It has not gone head-to-head against a nation which has a significant air force. Why is that? Its only record is against ragtag terrorist groups operating out of the Middle East, from countries which barely make ends meet, which are struggling to feed their people even once a day, suffering from starvation and under massive crippling sanctions in the international arena. So, this cannot be held as a good combat record. These countries don't have comparable fighter jets. They don't have a strong enough air defense system. So, I'm sorry, there is no significant combat record for the F-35 to be boasted about. Let us compare to the Su-30 MKI. The Sukhois have gone up against Pakistan twice during the so-called Operation Swift Retort back in 27th February 2019 after our successful Balakot airstrikes, and very recently in Operation Sindoor. In both these occasions, there was not a single Su-30 which went down. In fact, in Operation Sindoor, the Su-30 fleet basically wrecked Pakistani air bases. 11 of them were destroyed in the span of 25 minutes. That's an exceptional record. Plus, even the thrust vectoring of the AL-31 engines and its brilliant avionics made it perform the jaw-dropping maneuvers, the Cobra, the bell curve, and all these moves which helped it to dodge missiles, these air-to-air missiles. That is AIM-120 AMRAAMs from the F-16s and the PL-15 fired by the J-10C and the JF-17 Blunder of Pakistan. So this is a huge plus for the Su-30 MKI. One more thing is that even the F-35 did perform an evasive maneuver back in January against Yemen during Operation Rough Rider of the US Air Force. The Yemenis used some Soviet-era radar and got a missile lock and fired it in a manner that the pilot had to scramble his jet. He had to kind of perform a evasive maneuver to dodge that missile. Now, why is this a huge plus in the case of a Su-30 and not in the case of an F-35? The simple reason is that the F-35 is marked or marketed as a stealth fighter. In fact, even when President Trump made this proposal to India during his joint presser, you would remember he said the stealth fighter jet, the F-35. So ideally, with the jet being a stealth jet, the system should not be able to lock on to the jet, especially an outdated Soviet system. So it raises a huge question mark even about the stealth of this jet. Besides, one more thing which is worth mentioning is that the US Air Force itself has significantly slashed orders of the F-35. Its very high cost of maintenance, its logistical nightmare, which can be clearly seen, have led to the American Air Force, the country where this jet was born, has ended up rejecting it in the favor of the F-15EX, the new version of the F-15E. So that is one more point. Speaking of the logistical nightmare, you would remember the huge meme fest and the trolling on social media that happened when in mid-June, a F-35 of the British Navy landed in Thiruvananthapuram. No one would have realized or thought that this jet, which is supposedly the most advanced of our times, would be grounded for 38 days. And this is especially when the British BAE systems contributes around 17 to 20% to this jet. Even then, the UK Navy and engineers from Lockheed Martin and all these technicians could not get it up. And why is that? It was just apparently due to some rough weather that it came closer to India. It sought help. We allowed it to land, and it took it 38 days to become flyable again. Now imagine if we are caught up in a two-front war with China on the northern front, Pakistan on the western and northwestern front. Can we afford to have our jets lying in such a condition? Obviously not. So these developments would have certainly not escaped the eyes, the sensitive and precise vision of the Defense Acquisitions Council, even of the Indian Air Force officials, by the way. And hence that could have led to this rejection of the F-35. One more thing I must say is that NATO allies all as well are losing confidence in this jet. Canada, as a retaliation for President Trump's hawkish behavior against them, has decided to slash the deal. They are now planning to choose the Rafale in favor of the F-35. Countries such as Portugal, even several other NATO countries are kind of worried about a kill switch being embedded somewhere in this jet, which would enable the US to render these jets defunct entirely. There is a lot of backdoor software mischief that could be potentially present in this jet. In fact, one thing that we know for sure is that just by blocking spare parts and maintenance services, the US can technically ground these jets for as long as they want. So who would want their mainstay or their top fighter jet, who would want that remote control to be in someone else's hand? especially when we know that the US can conveniently switch sides when it comes to India and Pakistan. In fact, India is the only country on which China and America stand on one team in order to pull us down, obviously. It's been the same since the late 1960s during the Cold War, and nothing has changed much. So, looking at the technical aspects, looking at the financials, looking at the track record, and looking at the overall geopolitical scenario, these are the reasons that I feel India has ended up rejecting the F-35. We don't even need it. If the F-35 is a standard, we already have the much better Su-30 MKI. But of course, that's not going to be enough. That's not going to be enough, my dear friends. We need to step up our game. More and more orders of the Su-57E need to be placed now. Now, I guess that's the only option. AMCA is still a long-term solution. It's a concept. Its first prototype is going to be out by the end of the decade. Its first flyable model is going to be out there by 2032. It will start production in 2035, and it will become the mainstay in terms of the number of jets in our Air Force by 2036 or even after that. So it's a concept, it's a very long term solution. In the near future, in the stopgap measure, as they say, Su 57E is the only option that I can see as of now. Thank you so much, friends. Jai Hind.